They were ghosts in the wind, outlaws who vanished without a trace, a fearless gold thief who disappeared with a fortune, a train bandit whose body traveled the country long after death, a gang leader who defied the law and may have faked his own demise, a ruthless robber who lost his head, literally, and a mysterious fugitive who outran an entire nation in the frozen wild. 5 legendary criminals, 5 unsolved mysteries, and not one of them was ever truly found. Who were they? Where did they go? And could some still be out there waiting to be discovered? Stay with us, because once you hear their stories, you won't be able to look away. Rattlesnake Dick. The elusive California outlaw, Rattlesnake Dick, born Richard Barter in the 1830s, was one of the most infamous yet lesser-known outlaws of the California Gold Rush era. His story, filled with cunning heists, narrow escapes, and an enduring mystery, places him among the great bandits of the Wild West. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who sought quick wealth through claim jumping or violent holdups, Rattlesnake Dick preferred careful planning and clever deception to execute his crimes. His nickname reportedly came from his fearlessness in handling rattlesnakes, but it also suited his reputation for being sly, unpredictable, and dangerous. Originally from Canada, Dick made his way to California during the gold rush, drawn by the same dreams of fortune that lured thousands of others. However, unlike the hard-working miners who toiled for gold, Dick chose a different path. He fell in with a group of outlaws who specialized in robbing gold shipments and stealing from miners. He quickly became known for his ability to evade capture, using the rugged Sierra Nevada terrain to his advantage. His network of accomplices and hideouts allowed him to stay one step ahead of the law for years. One of Rattlesnake Dick's most famous exploits was his attempt to steal a massive gold shipment from the Wells Fargo stagecoach. He and his gang, which included the notorious George and Cyrus Skinner, hatched an elaborate plan to intercept the gold as it was transported from a mining operation in Northern California. They ambushed the transport, but their carefully laid plan quickly fell apart. A shootout ensued, forcing them to flee with only a portion of the gold. The stolen gold was reportedly divided among the gang, but in the chaos of the escape, a large portion of it was hidden in the mountains, never to be recovered. This lost treasure became the subject of countless legends, with treasure hunters searching for it for decades after Dick's disappearance. Despite his talent for escaping the law, Dick's luck began to run out. Law enforcement intensified their efforts to capture him, and after a series of betrayals within his own gang, he found himself increasingly isolated. The authorities finally managed to corner him in 1859 near Auburn, California. In the ensuing gunfight, Rattlesnake Dick was reportedly shot multiple times. However, accounts of what happened next remain unclear. Some say he died from his wounds and was buried in an unmarked grave. Others believe he managed to slip away into the wilderness, never to be seen again. The uncertainty surrounding his fate only fueled the legend of Rattlesnake Dick. Stories circulated that he had escaped to Mexico, while others claimed he had assumed a new identity and lived out his days in anonymity. The missing gold added another layer of mystery to his tale. Many believed that if he had survived, he would have eventually returned to recover his hidden treasure. Over the years, treasure hunters and historians have tried to trace his movements, but no definitive evidence has ever surfaced. To this day, the legend of Rattlesnake Dick continues to intrigue those fascinated by the lawless days of the Wild West. His story, marked by bold robberies, narrow escapes, and the ever-elusive missing gold, ensures that he remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of American outlaw history. Elmer McCurdy, the Bandit, who became a sideshow attraction. Elmer McCurdy's story is one of the strangest in the history of American outlaws. Unlike most bandits who disappeared into legend after their deaths, McCurdy's journey continued for decades in an unexpected and bizarre way. Born in 1880 in Maine, McCurdy had a troubled youth, marked by alcoholism and failed attempts at making an honest living. He tried his hand at plumbing, joined the military, and even attempted prospecting, but nothing seemed to work out for him. His military experience, however, introduced him to the use of explosives, a skill that would later define his short-lived career as a criminal. By 1911, McCurdy had turned to crime, hoping to make a name for himself as a skilled train and bank robber. However, his robberies were often poorly executed due to his overconfidence in his dynamite expertise. His most infamous failure came when he and his gang attempted to rob a bank in Chautauqua, Kansas. Using what he believed was the perfect amount of explosives, he blew up the bank's safe, only to destroy most of the money inside. The gang escaped with little to show for their efforts, and McCurdy's reputation as an incompetent outlaw grew. His most ambitious heist took place later that year when he and his gang targeted a Katy railroad train near Okesa, Oklahoma. Acting on a tip, they believed the train was carrying a substantial sum of money, reportedly $400,000 in cash. However, they mistakenly stopped the wrong train and ended up with only a few dollars, some whiskey, and a handful of personal belongings from passengers. Frustrated but undeterred, McCurdy continued drinking heavily and hiding out in an Oklahoma barn. His luck ran out in October 1911 when a posse tracked him down. A shootout ensued, and McCurdy, despite his drunken state, put up a fight. After being mortally wounded, he was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where the undertaker embalmed his body with an unusually strong arsenic-based preservative, ensuring it would not decay. Since no one came to claim the corpse, the undertaker saw an opportunity to make some money. He dressed McCurdy's body, propped it up, and charged people to see the bandit who wouldn't give up. For years, McCurdy's body was passed around, sold to carnival operators, and displayed in wax museums and sideshows across the country. His mummified remains were featured as everything from an outlaw to a dead gunfighter, and even as a prop in horror exhibits. At some point, he was coated in wax, further disguising the fact that he was, in fact, a real human body. His final surreal discovery came in 1976 at an amusement park in Long Beach, California. A television crew filming an episode of The $6 Million Man accidentally knocked over what they thought was a mannequin. To their shock, they discovered it was a real, mummified corpse. Authorities investigated, and forensic analysis confirmed that it was none other than Elmer McCurdy. After nearly 65 years of being displayed as a roadside attraction, his body was finally given a proper burial in Oklahoma, where he was laid to rest in 1977 under a thick layer of concrete to ensure that his wandering days were over. McCurdy's story is a testament to the unpredictability of history. Unlike most bandits who vanish into legend, his tale was extended long past his death, making him one of the most bizarre figures in outlaw lore. Bill Doolin, the vanishing leader of the Wild Bunch. Bill Doolin was one of the most infamous outlaws of the late 19th century, a man who led the notorious Wild Bunch gang across the American frontier. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Doolin was not just a reckless gunslinger. He was a calculated and intelligent criminal who managed to elude capture for years. His ability to disappear into the vast wilderness after daring robberies made him one of the most wanted men in the West. Even after authorities claimed to have killed him, rumors persisted that he had escaped and lived under an assumed identity, ensuring that his legend endured. Born in 1858 in Arkansas, Doolin found himself drawn to the outlaw lifestyle after working as a cowboy and falling in with men who would later become members of his gang. His criminal career truly began when he joined the Dalton Gang, a group of brothers notorious for their train and bank robberies. However, when most of the gang was wiped out in the disastrous Coffeyville raid in 1892, Doolin avoided the same fate by choosing not to participate that day. With the Daltons gone, he formed his own gang, known as the Wild Bunch or the Oklahombres, a loosely organized band of outlaws who specialized in robbing banks, stagecoaches, and trains across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Doolin's leadership style was different from other outlaws of his time. While violent when necessary, he was known for his charm, strategic thinking, and deep loyalty to his gang members. This made him an effective leader, allowing his gang to execute numerous successful robberies. One of their most famous heists occurred in 1893 when they raided the town of Ingalls, Oklahoma. The gang took over the entire town, robbing businesses and looting saloons before engaging in a deadly gunfight with U.S. Marshals. Several lawmen and gang members were killed, but Doolin managed to escape yet again. Despite being relentlessly pursued by law enforcement, Doolin proved to be elusive. He frequently changed hideouts, relying on sympathizers to protect him. He even attempted to settle down for a time, marrying a woman named Edith and fathering a child while living under an assumed name. But his notoriety made it impossible for him to live a quiet life. As pressure from law enforcement intensified, many of his gang members were captured or killed, leaving Doolin increasingly isolated. The official story claims that in August 1896, Deputy U.S. Marshal Heck Thomas finally tracked Doolin down in Lawson, Oklahoma. A gunfight ensued, and Doolin was shot dead. His body was put on public display to prove that the infamous outlaw was finally gone. However, almost immediately, rumors began to circulate that the authorities had killed the wrong man or that Doolin had faked his death. Some claimed he had fled to South America, while others believed he had simply changed his identity and lived the rest of his life in secrecy. Even his widow reportedly doubted that the body displayed was truly her husband's. For years, sightings of Doolin were reported throughout the West, and his legend continued to grow. His ability to escape capture so many times, combined with the mystery surrounding his supposed death, ensured that his story remained one of the most enduring in American outlaw history. Whether he truly died in a hail of bullets or managed one final great escape remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Old West. Jack Ketchum, the Phantom of the West. Jack Ketchum was one of the most feared and mysterious outlaws of the American West. Unlike many bandits of his era, Ketchum's notoriety was built on a combination of violent crimes, audacious train robberies, and his eerie, almost ghost-like presence. His ability to vanish into the wilderness after committing daring heists earned him a reputation as an outlaw who seemed untouchable, until his luck finally ran out in the most gruesome way possible. Born Thomas Edward Ketchum in Texas in 1863, he was drawn to the lawless lifestyle at an early age. By the 1890s, he had turned to train robbery, operating primarily in New Mexico and Texas. His gang, which included his brother Sam Ketchum, became infamous for their relentless attacks on the Southern Pacific Railroad. While many outlaws robbed banks or stagecoaches, Ketchum preferred the high-risk, high-reward strategy of targeting trains. This put him in direct conflict with railroad detectives and law enforcement, who launched an aggressive campaign to capture him. Ketchum was known for his brutality during robberies. He had little patience for resistance and was quick to resort to violence if things didn't go according to plan. His gang gained a reputation for their swift and efficient heists, often disappearing into the desert before authorities could respond. His most infamous crime occurred in 1899 when he and his gang attempted to rob a train near Folsom, New Mexico. However, the heist quickly went wrong. Ketchum was wounded in a gunfight, and several of his men were either killed or captured. His brother Sam was mortally wounded in a separate incident, marking the beginning of the end for Jack's reign of terror. Despite his injuries, Ketchum managed to evade capture for a time, but he made a fatal mistake when he attempted to rob a train solo later that year. He was recognized by the train crew, who shot him before he could complete the robbery. Severely wounded, he was taken into custody and transported to Clayton, New Mexico, where he faced trial for his crimes. Unfortunately for Ketchum, he was about to become the victim of an unusual and brutal legal precedent. At the time, New Mexico law classified train robbery as a capital offense. While this was rarely enforced with the death penalty, Ketchum's notorious reputation and the region's desire to make an example out of him led to a swift and brutal sentence: death by hanging. His execution in 1901 became one of the most infamous in American history. Due to a miscalculation by the executioners, the noose was not properly adjusted for his weight. When the trapdoor opened, the force of the drop resulted in Ketchum's head being completely severed from his body. The gruesome spectacle horrified onlookers and became one of the most infamous botched executions in the West. Despite his violent end, the legend of Jack Ketchum only grew in the years following his death. Some claimed he had hidden a fortune in stolen gold somewhere in the New Mexico wilderness, while others insisted that he had been working with a secret network of outlaws who continued his work long after he was gone. His eerie, almost supernatural reputation gave rise to ghost stories, with locals claiming to have seen his spirit wandering near the site of his execution. To this day, Jack Ketchum remains one of the most enigmatic figures of the Old West. His blend of violence, mystery, and a truly horrific demise solidified his place in outlaw history, ensuring that his legend would never be forgotten. Albert Johnson, the Mad Trapper of Rat River, the mysterious fugitive of the North. The story of Albert Johnson, better known as the Mad Trapper of Rat River, is one of the most bizarre and mysterious outlaw tales in North American history. Unlike the traditional American bandit who robbed banks and trains, Johnson operated in the frozen wilderness of Canada's Yukon and Northwest Territories. His identity, motives, and even his origin remain shrouded in mystery, making him one of the most enigmatic fugitives to ever evade capture. His ability to survive in the harsh Arctic conditions and elude a massive manhunt for weeks cemented his status as a legendary outlaw who was never truly identified. In December 1931, a stranger arrived in the remote Arctic settlement of Fort McPherson, claiming the name Albert Johnson. He was a loner, refusing to interact with other trappers or townspeople. He built an isolated cabin along the Rat River and refused to obtain a trapping license, which was required by law at the time. This caught the attention of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, who decided to investigate. When two officers arrived at his cabin to question him, Johnson refused to speak and ignored their requests. A few days later, the RCMP returned with a search warrant. As they approached, Johnson suddenly opened fire, wounding one of the officers. The shocked Mounties retreated, realizing they were dealing with a dangerous and unpredictable man. Over the next few weeks, Johnson became the target of one of the most intense manhunts in Canadian history. Despite being pursued by highly trained officers, Johnson repeatedly evaded capture in the harsh Arctic wilderness. In January 1932, a heavily armed posse surrounded his cabin, hoping to take him by force. Johnson, however, had fortified his hideout and engaged in a fierce gunfight with the Mounties. After a 15-hour standoff, the police attempted to dynamite his cabin, reducing it to rubble. Yet when they moved in, Johnson was nowhere to be found. He had somehow escaped into the frozen landscape. What followed was an extraordinary game of cat and mouse. Johnson, equipped with little more than a rifle and a few supplies, led the authorities on a 150-mile chase through brutal sub-zero conditions. He traveled across mountains, rivers, and frozen tundra, surviving in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The Mounties, using dog sleds and local indigenous trackers, followed his trail but were repeatedly outwitted. Johnson walked in circles to confuse trackers, crossed frozen lakes, and scaled cliffs where no human should have been able to survive. As the pursuit continued, Johnson became a national sensation. Newspapers across North America covered the story of the mad trapper who was defying the police and surviving against all odds. The Canadian government even enlisted the help of an aircraft, one of the first instances of a plane being used in a manhunt. After 37 days of relentless pursuit, the Mounties finally caught up with Johnson in February 1932 near the Eagle River. In one final desperate attempt to escape, Johnson engaged in a deadly firefight with the officers. He was eventually shot multiple times and killed. When authorities examined his body, the mystery deepened. Johnson carried large amounts of cash, but had no identification. His fingerprints didn't match any known criminal records, and no one came forward to claim him. To this day, his true identity remains unknown. Theories range from him being an American fugitive to a European spy, but no definitive proof has ever been found. The legend of the Mad Trapper lives on, with some believing he had help escaping, and others insisting he left behind a hidden fortune somewhere in the Arctic wilderness. His mysterious origins, remarkable survival skills, and ability to outmaneuver the law have ensured that his story remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the North.